Welcome and good evening. You're in for a very entertaining and thought-provoking discussion this evening surrounding the right to vote. The right to vote has been said to be the most sacrosanct franchise of U.S. citizenship, and that is truly the belief. Before we begin tonight's panel discussion, as is our tradition in the African American community, we would like to begin with a word of prayer. It is my privilege to introduce to you Ms. Shavonne Arline Bradley, International Co-Chair of Social Action for Delta Sigma Theta Sorority.
Good evening, everyone. It is an honor and privilege to be with you tonight. As we honor our time together, we want to begin with a word of prayer. Let us pray. God, we thank you so much for the opportunity to gather, even virtually, for this most sacred conversation around voting rights. Voting rights are a righteous thing, God, and you have given us the opportunity to gather because this is an important issue. You are the God of all, you are the God of peace and the God of justice. And tonight we ask that you bless this time together for clarity, for possibility, but most of all, God, for victory in this fight. It's in Jesus' name we do pray. Amen.
Good evening, everyone. I am Beverly Smith, National President and CEO for Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, here to welcome you this evening and to open our session. You know, the title of this session really has to do with our vote. The For the People Act, House Bill 1 in the House and a pending bill in the Senate, which really is intended to curb voter suppression and make it easier for Americans to vote in the future. So what do we know about the vote? It was Martin Luther King who said the vote is the most powerful instrument ever devised by human beings for breaking down injustice and destroying the terrible walls which imprison people because they are different than others. Our goal and the goal of this bill is to make sure we, as organizations, as the D9, as Delta Sigma Theta and Omega Psi Phi, do what we can to make sure we break down those walls and do as we are charged by Martin Luther King in terms of where we are. So tonight we're going to spend some time talking about that bill with some incredible people. The issue we're facing, another issue that we're facing, has to do with voter suppression. New laws are coming in across the states. Georgia, as we know, is very prominent in making sure they have laws that really take away the rights of people. We as an organization in Delta Sigma Theta have joined in a lawsuit, the first to join in a lawsuit, together with the Legal Defense Fund. And you'll hear from Leah Aiden later on in the program about why it's important to sue and to stand up to make sure we take care of those rights. You know, it seems like we're always on the defensive, but we are not. If we take a look at it from the other perspective, we are the ones that really are leading the charge. It is the side that is against voter rights that's on the defensive. The reason these issues keep coming up is because the strength of our organizations and the strength of the African American vote is showing itself in a grand way. And the more we show our strength, the more others fight back with laws, bills, rules to try and stop those things we know are our rights and the rights of those who stand for justice and for equity for all. So here we are again, trying to work to show our strength, trying to make sure others understand how important this vote is. We want you to listen tonight to all that's being said. Listen tonight to the discussion. Make sure that you stand up and do what we need to do. Make sure that we handle that fortitude that is Delta Sigma Theta, that the friendship that is essential to the soul in Omega Psi Phi goes to the friendship that we have with others to make sure all stand up for those voting rights. Enjoy the program, think hard, make sure you don't give up the fight. Don't be on the defensive. We, in fact, are in the lead in winning this war. The power in our voice will continue to be strong as long as you as individuals are strong. So it's my pleasure and honor to introduce the moderator for this evening and to hear a welcome for the Grand Basileus of the, as he would say, Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated, Dr. David Marion. Frater Marion, you're up.
Thank you so much, Madam President. Always a joy to be on the call with you. I'm excited about this call and this town hall tonight with this great group of panelists. And so let me do my job and introduce them. First is Leah Aden. Leah Aden has served as a Deputy Director of Litigation at the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, Incorporated, since October 2018, assisting in the planning, strategy, and supervision of LDF's voting rights work. In light of the upcoming post-census redistricting cycle, Leah will assist in the planning, strategy, and supervision of LDF's redistricting efforts to prevent the dilution of Black voting power. Since joining LDF in 2012, Leah has had an active civil rights advocacy docket using litigation, policy, and public education strategies to ensure that Black people have equal access to the political process, economic opportunity, and environmental justice. Prior to joining LDF, Leah was a litigation associate in the New York office of Freed, Frank, Harris, Shriver, and Jacobson, having earned the prestigious Freed Frank LDF Fellowship. She has also served as a fellow at the Center for Civil Rights at the University of North Carolina School of Law, where she focused on public education issues, including school desegregation and education adequacy litigation. She also served as a law clerk to the late Honorable John T. Nixon of the United States District Court for the Middle District of Tennessee. Please welcome Leah Aden. Next, we have Representative Yvette Clarke. Hailing from Central Brooklyn, Congresswoman Yvette Diane Clarke feels honored to represent the community that raised her. She is the proud daughter of Jamaican immigrants and takes her passion for her Caribbean heritage to Congress, where she co-chairs the Congressional Caribbean Caucus and works to foster relationships between the United States and the Caribbean community. Clarke is chair of the Homeland Cybersecurity, Infrastructure Protection, and Innovation Subcommittee under the jurisdiction of the House Committee on Homeland Security and was co-chair of the powerful Energy and Commerce Committee during the 116th Congress. Clarke has been a member of the Congressional Black Caucus since coming to Congress in 2007 and today chairs its Immigration Task Force. As a representative of the 9th Congressional District of New York, Congresswoman Clarke has dedicated herself to continuing the legacy of excellence established by the late Honorable Shirley Chisholm, the first Black woman and Caribbean American elected to Congress. Please welcome Congresswoman Clarke. Next, we have Brother Theodore Ted R. Johnson. He is the director of the Fellows Program at the Brennan Center for Justice. His work explores the role that race plays in electoral politics, issue framing, and disparities in policy outcomes. Previously, he was a national fellow at New America and a research manager at Deloitte. He is also a retired commander in the U.S. Navy following a 2-decade career that included service as a White House fellow, military professor at the U.S. Naval War College, and a speechwriter to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. His work has appeared in the Washington Post, Atlantic, New York Times Magazine, Wall Street Journal, National Review, and Politico, among other publications. He teaches law and public policy to master's and doctoral students. His debut book, When the Stars Begin to Fall, Overcoming Racism and Renewing the Promise of America, outlines a path toward a multiracial national solidarity to finally overcome the existential threat of racism in the United States. It was published by the Atlantic Monthly Press in June 2021. He holds a BS in mathematics from Hampton University, an ALM with a concentration in international relations from Harvard University, and a doctorate of law and policy from Northeastern University. Please welcome Dr. Johnson. Next, we have Brother Calvin Smyrie, business executive, state legislator, community and national leader, who earned his BS degree from Fort Valley State University, majoring in business administration with a minor in accounting. His career path has taken him from being a community organizer and director of the War on Poverty, that program in Columbus, Georgia, to his current positions as Executive Vice President of Corporate External Affairs at Synovus and President of the Synovus Foundation. He also serves on the company's 8-member corporate executive group. Synovus is a diversified financial services holding company with over $32 billion in assets based in Columbus, Georgia. It provides integrated financial services, including banking, financial management, insurance, mortgage, and leasing services through 39 banks and other offices in Georgia, Alabama, South Carolina, Florida, and Tennessee. It is the world's largest third-party processor of international payments and has been named one of the 100 best companies to work for. He was elected to the Georgia House of Representatives in 1974 as its youngest member at 26 years of age. As a 44-year legislative veteran and one of the deans of the House, he serves on the most important committees of the House. In the state budgetary process, he serves on the Appropriations Committee. He is also a member of the powerful Calendar Setting Rules Committee, as well as chairman of the House Minority Caucus. He previously served as chairman of the House Rules Committee and University System of Georgia Committee, which is oversight for the state's 34 public colleges and universities from 1993 to 1999. And he served as chairman of the House Industrial Relations Committee from 1991 to July of 1993. Welcome, Brother Smyrie. And that is our distinguished panel. And so we'll get right into it. We certainly welcome them and thank them for being with us this evening. We are here tonight to talk about voter suppression, as we are now witnessing bold, in-your-face efforts to suppress the vote of Black folks here in 2021. But I want to start from a historical perspective, because we all know attempts to disenfranchise Black voters has been a long, persistent tool of the majority. Can you explain how the current attempts to suppress our right to vote compare to the size, scope, and impact of those in the 1950s and the Jim Crow era? I'd like to hear from all of you on this, but let's start with Congresswoman Clark.
Well, first of all, Grand Basileus, thank you so much for being a co-host for this evening's very important discussion. Let me also acknowledge my soror president, Soror Beverly Smith of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. And, you know, with respect to voter suppression, the difference is the time. The difference is the tactics, but the outcome is the same and has been persistent. The march towards total enfranchisement of the American people, in particular, in specific, Black, brown communities, young people, and our elders, has always been elusive in the United States of America. And we in the House of Representatives recognize that it has been through the tremendous efforts of our late colleague, the Honorable John Lewis, and those of the 50s and 60s era, that we've even come thus far. We have an obligation and a responsibility to take things and move, as he would say, don't give up the fight. And that's where H.R.1 and S1 comes into play, the For the People Act. What we have attempted to do with this legislation is transformative in terms of the franchise. And at the heart of that is the underpinning of a democracy. The democracy as envisioned through the Constitution of the United States of America, and unfettered access to our right to vote. And what the For the People Act would do essentially is to make sure that every barrier that has been erected is deconstructed and put into the dust pile of history. And that's what we're here to discuss this evening. like I said, I think the main difference is that the tactics, maybe we're not trying to guess the number of bubbles in a bar of soap, but we are having to go through extreme lengths to find our polling sites, to address being purged from the rolls. So when we show up to vote, we are put through a whole bunch of machinations just to be able to find our name on the rolls. We are put into a situation or a position where we have to stand online for hours on end, where election day is not a holiday, so that individuals have to lose a day's pay in order to exercise their right to vote. These were tactics that have been with us since we actually gained the right to vote and prior to gaining the right to vote. And so our discussion this evening around the For the People Act will enlighten and I hope empower us to do everything that we can to impress upon the members of Congress, particularly in the U.S. Senate, that we mean business and that they must pass S1.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Clark. Representative Smyre, I know being from Georgia, you know about the, you have to guess accurately how many bubbles are in a bar of soap, how many seeds in the watermelon, how many bumps on the cucumber. You're fully aware of that. How are those times different from where we are today?
Well, Grand Basilos, let me just say hello to you and to all the men of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity, and also to Delta President Beverly Smith and all the members of Delta Sigma Theta. It's an honor to be with the other panelists tonight and to discuss a very important issue in America. To me, voting is fundamental. It's one of the basic rights that you have as an individual citizen here in the United States of America. And when you look at H.R.1 and other bills that are being passed, it's a regression and retrogression in terms of having the right to vote and having it done freely. And as Congresswoman just alluded to, H.R.1 is a bill that will make us more expandable in terms of the right to vote, and also looking at the various finance laws and the money and the integrity that's in politics. So with that in mind, as we saw in Georgia, there's an attempt to suppress the vote and to do things that are very onerous in terms of a person having the right to vote. So today's politics has become more sophisticated. It's become more so of individual acts that have suppressed the right to vote. And we must be vigilant and stand up to these types of laws that will prevent people from having the right to vote. In other words, having lesser voting precincts, having less of areas where you go and vote in the various precincts, the mailbox, the absentee ballots, the voting mail-in ballots, all these in cringed upon in terms of our election laws. So what we have to do is stand up and fight and continue to monitor these things. And I'm just alarmed that the United States Senate has not looked at a basic right and a basic fundamental right in terms of the right to vote. So that's where we stand as various states with our hodgepodge of election laws. We were hoping that H.R.1 would be passed so that we would have voter integrity around the nation. So that's what we have to continue to do. We have to continue to stand up. I've always stated that nobody can break your back unless you bend it. So for all of us that are in elected position, those that are in advocacy roles, there's a place for our advocates, and they played a vital role in the state of Georgia when we had draconian SB 202 that was passed in this legislative session. So we have to continue to fight and continue to stand up for the basic right to.
Thanks, Brother Smyre. Let me go to Deputy Director Aiden to get your opinion on this question.
I completely agree with the two people who've spoken before me, and I would up the ante and say that not only do we need H.R.1, this omnibus nationwide voter protection bill, but we also need H.R.4, named for John Lewis, to get ahead of voting discrimination that is sure to come. what we're seeing today is quite comparable to what we've seen before in every moment in history where Black, Latino, Asian American, Native American voters have been on the verge of exercising their voting power and have exercised their vote. You get things like what we are seeing in Georgia and in Florida. And so we need to get both protections for it, and we need to be ahead of those bad actors, because we will continue to see these patterns. You can't ignore that in Georgia and Florida and elsewhere, bills like SB 202 come on the heels of the political participation of Black voters in particular. And the strategies are similar. Today, officials would have you try to minimize the bills like SB 202 and its provisions for their singular impact, their singular provision, and those provisions impact on voters. And fine, when you criminalize providing water to people waiting online, that is evidence of an individual provision being discriminatory and trying to suppress and chill the participation of Black voters. But what we must do is also look at the entirety of the voting experience, which is under attack and which will be addressed by H.R.1 and H.R.4, and see that the challenge provisions collectively try to curb voting at every phase and catch us at every phase of the political process. And that was true of what our ancestors and our parents and grandparents experienced, and that is also true with what we're seeing today. And I'll just provide one example. Georgia once justified its strict photo ID requirements for in-person voting on the basis that voters without ID could vote absentee. But now SB 202 does away with that safety valve by requiring ID requirements for absentee voting. It adds an immaterial date of birth requirement. It adds restrictions on when and how people can request and submit absentee applications. It limits drop boxes. It limits mobile voting units. It limits the period for voting in runoff elections. Again, it limits line relief. It limits when you can vote provisionally. It enables mass challenges. Each of those alone are a problem. Collectively, they are trying to catch people, deter them from showing up to vote, or when they ultimately do reach a polling place, make their vote not have meaning. And this is what bills like H.R.1 and H.R.4 are meant to address. Every phase of the political process, both create some standards for how we participate, and then get ahead of the bad actors who, frankly, will continue to keep coming up with nefarious stratagems. That will continue to happen. And that is why we have to have protections in place based upon the evidence, based upon what we know is happening in our communities. And that is why, the Legal Defense Fund has been advocating for years for the provisions that are now part of H.R.1 and hope to be a part of H.R.4.
Thanks, Leah. Dr. Johnson, I want you to weigh in on this, but I also want you to weigh in on something else, because it's clear we believe voter suppression can take place in various forms through polluting the airwaves with misinformation and disinformation, to gerrymandering, taking the voting rights away from felons, strict, arcane voter identification laws, as Leah just talked about, to restricting weekend voting, to abolishing souls to the polls, invalidating votes post-election. I want to examine the impact of these. And Dr. Johnson, we know disinformation is real. Can you describe some of the disinformation campaign tactics used, specifically those aimed at Black folks, and what can be done practically in the future to counter these tactics as you tie both questions in together in your response?
Yes, thank you. And it's an honor to be here with my brothers in Omega, as well as with the women of Delta Sigma Theta. And so a few things. One, I think a quote from Reverend William Barber sums up the differences between the 50s and today nicely. He said, "Jim Crow didn't die. He simply went to law school. And now we're contending with James Crow Esquire. And instead of trying to avoid German shepherds and fire hoses and the violence of white vigilantes, white terrorists in the South, we are now presented with lots of legislation and regulation meant to complicate Black people's access to the polls, not outright deny them, but put out so many barriers and obstacles that it has the effect of denying people the access to the polls. This is done through a number of ways, as my co-panelists have already outlined well, and I won't go back over. But to your second question about misinformation, it's happening in a number of ways, both from those folks in our society that don't want Black people to weigh in our democracy, as well as from foreign actors who are looking to disrupt our democracy by exploiting racial tensions in America. We know that the Russians would show Facebook ads to white voters of Black people with guns saying they were Black Lives Matter protests, trying to use that misinformation to make white people more angry and vote against any bills that would further democratic participation, especially by people of color. We know that certain radio ads by particular candidates have put out bad information about where the polls are or about the times that polls are open as a way of trying to get people to go to the wrong places and thereby have their votes not counted. We know that candidates have asked their supporters to show up to polling places to monitor the voting that's happening there, and even encouraging some of them to show up with arms, which is not permitted in most states in the United States. So this kind of disinformation, misinformation is meant to do one thing. It is to decrease the morale of Black people. It is meant to decrease our participation in our democracy. And it is meant to exclude us from this country so that those with power can shape it in a way that advantages them and leaves the rest of us behind. The only path forward is, one, to learn all of their tricks and tactics and meet James Crow Esquire's legal training with voter mobilization, with our own enthusiasm and ability to surmount those barriers they put in front of us, but also to support things like the For the People Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, in order to ensure our systems and institutions are reformed so that our voting rights are protected as guaranteed to us by the 14th and 15th Amendment.
Thanks, Dr. Johnson. Congresswoman Clark, would you weigh in on this in terms of the level of disinformation that we've seen in 2020 and going back even to 2016 that has been specifically aimed at Black folks, and what we can do about that in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's very clear that our adversaries have recognized that through the use of social media, through the use of broadcast media, radio media, sending out outright lies can distort and discourage voters from exercising their right and their franchise. We've seen examples of there being outright lies about the actual election day, that election day was moved, was changed, so that people would actually miss the opportunity to vote. We've seen various misinformation about polling sites and what's open, when it's open. And so the idea is to use every tactic at their disposal, our adversaries, to discourage Black voters, particularly knowing that so many of our voters are also workers who have limited time to cast their ballots, to discourage them, to delay them, to do everything in their power so that the vote cannot be cast. And so one of the things that the For the People Act does is that it makes sure that all of those barriers that would be erected in terms of misinformation are dealt with forthrightly. I'm really happy to see the way that our Attorney General, Merrick Garland, has stepped up with his Civil Rights Division to begin bringing suit against those who would, again, use these tactics to suppress our ability to vote. to discourage, to confuse, to essentially take the wind out of our sails as we mobilize in our communities to get our voters out. And I think that it's going to take all of us really pressing for the Senate to pass the For the People's Act S1, because we've already passed it out of the House of Representatives. We are awaiting action from the U.S. Senate in order to make this the law. And this law would essentially be retroactive. It's making a lot of these tactics illegal. And so it's very important that this conversation, we leave it this evening, understanding the imperative of getting the Senate to act.
Thanks so much, Congresswoman Clark. Brother Smyrie, what is your take about this disinformation? We know it was at an all-time high, again in 2016 and 2020, but even in the senatorial runoff there in Georgia. What do you see that we can do to counter those tactics?
Well, Grand Bosselus, that is so true. And like Congresswoman Clark stated, there's been so much information and misinformation. When you start thinking about the robocalls, the various mailings that you get at your home, and the disinformation that's gone out through social media, it brings discord within our electorate, and that causes and tries to suppress the vote. So with that in mind, we have to continue to be vigilant in that respect. As you can recall, there was a time when we had the Voting Rights Act and Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act that it was almost like the Voting Rights Act was almost like during the period of Reconstruction, that when states would act, they knew that the muscle of the federal government was there to make sure that they did act. And with that in mind, we were able to get clearance from the Justice Department before any sort of effective law could come into place that would suppress our votes. So it's things of that nature. It's that type of extent of the law that we have to continue to be very, very vigilant in. And with the large sums of money that is spent in the political arena these days, H.R.1 would have addressed that as well. So the false information is so fluent out there, and is so rampant that an informed voter is a great voter. It's a dangerous weapon to be an informed voter because of the fact that you have significant amount of influence, and in political nature, knowledge is power. So with that in mind, we have to continue to be involved in the political process. We have to continue to monitor these type of operations, and we have to be very vigilant in terms of the misinformation that's carried out. And that's why H.R.1 is so important. And it's so important that the United States Senate stand up and give some coverage for those states that have gone to the point of suppressing the vote. And hopefully we can continue our fight and restore some of the power that was in the Voting Rights Act, and give some of these states protection around the country, and have uniformity in our voting, and restore voter integrity in our voting system throughout America.
Thank you so much. Leah, you talked about some of this, and I want you also to talk about these great disinformation campaigns that we've been seeing. But there are some pre-election day voter suppression tactics, such as purging voter files, challenging voter registration information. We talked about polling place reductions or relocations, where easily accessible voting precincts are closed, no early voting, or reducing early voting days, and etc. In your experience, what can we do to proactively mitigate these impacts on voters before the election?
Wonderful. So I want to just reframe the question about misinformation a little bit, because misinformation to me is using fraud to support a poll tax, or the claims of lack of voter integrity to support white primaries. And now, we use those same scare tactics, misinformation about voter fraud, which does not exist, a lack of integrity in our elections, which does not exist, to undergird modern day voter suppression tactics. So I would love people to ask whose integrity is in question. And it is not the integrity of Black voters. If you ask us, failing to protect us and enforce our 14th and 15th Amendment rights should call into question the nature of our democracy, the strength of our democracy. But yet, you see in Georgia, we show up and show out. We've come out in historic numbers, despite all the barriers leading up to it for years, to save our democracy in 2020 and then with the runoff in 2021. So I'd really love, when we talk about misinformation, to point the finger at who feels that our elections aren't secure and what role they play in fostering an environment that really puts our democracy in peril. And that is why you need H.R.1. One of its core provisions is placing restrictions on the practice of purging names from the voter rolls. Not to pick on Georgia, but in 2017, it carried out one of the largest voter purges, or the largest voter purge in U.S. history, purging more than 500,000 voters. And so H.R.1 would put restrictions on that and respond, frankly, to the Supreme Court opening the door from that in the decision Husted in around 2015 and 2016. But H.R.1 doesn't stop there. It mandates 2 weeks of early voting in every state. It creates national automatic voter registration. It modernizes the voter registration process, including by providing same-day and online voter registration. It allows all eligible voters access to mail-in voting and the ability to request their ballots. And most importantly, we can't forget this segment of our population, millions of voters across this country, because of the structural racism in our criminal justice system, who cannot vote because of felony convictions. And H.R.1 would restore the ability for that population of people who is central and part of our community to access federal elections. So there are many ways that we can address cuts to voter purges, cuts to early voting, these new or modern day stratagems to deny our vote. And a lot of those are through the omnibus H.R.1 and also the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which would then prevent jurisdictions from coming up with the next stratagem to suppress our vote.
And I think I'd like to add, Leah, that not only did we show up and showed out, but to the effect that we overcame all of the voter suppression tactics, and we did all of this during a pandemic. That's what.
But we shouldn't have to. It is quite. I mean, we saved our democracy, but we don't exist to save our democracy. We exist to be full citizens in this country and to have full lives and to have access to jobs and healthcare and education and justice. And this is unacceptable. That is what we have to do for this country. The time is for our country to stand up for us and to treat us like full citizens. And this is through H.R.1 and H.R.4 and many more pieces of legislation.
Dr. Johnson, let me hear your opinion on this question about the voter suppression tactics that we just spoke about that happened right before the election, pre-election day voter suppression tactics.
Yeah, and I associate myself with the things that everyone else has said. And the one thing I want to call out is that historically, when we think about voter suppression, we think about it being a problem of the South and not a national problem. Well, today it's a national problem. There's no running from it. We're just as likely to see voter purges, voter suppression laws in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania as we are to see it in Texas and in Florida. We know that remnants of Jim Crow, like disenfranchising folks who've been convicted of felonies in states that have large Black populations, but not in states that have large white populations, is a way that our vote is suppressed. We know that those who are well-resourced, the wealthy, use their money to outweigh the voice of the people. And this is why the provision in S1 and HR1 to get dark money out of politics and allow the control of our democracy to be returned to the people is so important. This is why preclearance is important. And there are a couple of Supreme Court cases coming before the court this fall about Section 2 of the Voting Rights. So if we thought that Shelby County and getting rid of the preclearance formula was a problem that led to all of these new voter suppression laws, then just wait to see what this new Supreme Court will do with this next set of questions around the Voting Rights Act. Right now, we can look at a law and watch how it's implemented and say that this law, whether it meant to or not, discriminates against Black people at a disproportionate rate. And if the Supreme Court rules against Section 2 or finds that it doesn't hold, then even when there are disparate outcomes based on otherwise, ostensibly colorblind policy, those things will hold. And we won't even have refuge in disparate impact to protect the right of people of color to participate in our democracy on equal footing. So this is an inflection point in our democracy. This is the question. We are now answering the question of whether we are going to be an inclusive, participatory democracy, or if we are going to return to the days where democracy was only meant for some to the exclusion of all others. And this will define what sort of nation we're going to become. But as has been mentioned, Black folks will have their say in this fight, and as we have had since the country's inception. And so the fight will continue, but the new tactics that are looking to remove or complicate our access to the polls will always arise, and we'll have to meet that with the same fire.
Representative Smyre, on election day, we know there are voter suppression tactics as well to nullify Black votes, such as limiting voting machines at precincts, as we've talked about, consolidating precincts to purposely cause long lines, limiting voting hours so that polls close earlier than needed or necessary, preventing groups like the Deltas and Omegas from providing provisions to people standing in line to vote. In your state, Reverend Tim McDonald in Atlanta said, something is wrong when you can't give grandmama a bottle of water and a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. What can be done as citizens and civic organizations to make voting easier and more accessible?
Well, what really underlines all of this, if somebody doesn't want you to have something, then you already know how powerful it is. If they don't want you to have it, then you should know how important it is to have it. And so we must continue to educate our communities. And the Senate Bill 202 was just on. When you think about the fact of the matter is, when you think about limiting the time that a person can vote and limiting weekend voting, and this is a direct suppression of voting in light of the fact that we vote on weekends and we vote during off time. So the things that I like to amplify is educating our communities, becoming more involved. Never stop voter registration. We just can't have voter drives in season of the election. We must be very vigilant and have voter drives all the time. Mobilization of our forces, mobilization of all of our various organizations in our community. And then we must defeat states' rights. We must not allow nationalization of states' rights, because if you have a whole lot of states with various voting laws, then that's when you have the disadvantages that kick in. So those are some of the factors that we must continue to do in terms of the voting. Georgia laws changed because we were victorious. Had not it been a 2 United States Senate and a presidential election that was carried in the state of Georgia, then you may not have heard about voting reform in the state of Georgia. But nonetheless, we woke up and we came out and we voted like we've never voted before. And the only people in America that set public policy are elected officials. So why would you not be an advocate? Why would you not be in an advocacy role and defending the right to vote and be out about turning out and getting people out to vote? So that's my, as an elected official of 47 years, I know the value of a vote, and the value of a vote is unmeasurable. And we need to continue to fight for the right to vote and not to allow anybody to.
Thank you, Representative Smyre. That was a powerful response. The police were called on it, so we know that was a good one. Congresswoman Clark, could you speak to that?
Absolutely. I happen to be here in Washington, D.C., and it's one thing that the Honorable late John Lewis emphasized to us as colleagues, as members of the CBC, as members of Congress, and that is that the right to vote is sacred. And so one of the things that we need to do is make sure that we maintain our passion for using our franchise in America. And with that, we need to outwit, outsmart, and outmaneuver our adversaries. There are many ways in which, one, we need to apply ourselves right now. And one of them is constantly pushing up on the members of the U.S. Senate that have not seen the light. And right now is the perfect time to do so. We need to, send them letters, send them emails, keep calling their offices, just be a total nuisance until it reaches a fever pitch. And then we need to maximize on our organizational skills so that all of the obstacles that have been put in our way in our respective states, if they say you can't give provision while people are waiting online, well, then let us create a pathway, whether it's providing transportation where food and provision are provided on that transportation and people carry it with them, whether it is making sure that we are educating our voters about what types of IDs are made available and prepare prior to election day, prior to the months in advance, so that we have everything we need provided for voters so that they can withstand all of the obstacles that have been erected to stop their franchise. I can agree more with Representative Smyrie. We need to be registering people to vote year round, day in, day out, full stop. So there are a lot of things that we have at our disposal. One of the things that I thought was extraordinary was how Georgians use their buying power to push up on corporations around what was taking place. I mean, they came around after the fact, but you know what? We still need to hold them accountable because now the law is in place. What will they do in terms of applying their resources, their employees, to make sure that all Georgians can vote? And in any other state where those are circumstances, we need to make sure that corporate America feels our fervor over the right to vote. And we can't stop. We have to maintain, and not only an advocacy, but an activism around the right to vote and just overwhelm the circumstances. I think there's a multi-pronged approach here. I would love to see us pass S1. Clearly, Mr. Manchin has had a change of heart. A number of our civil rights leaders have met with him. He's begun shifting his position. We need to undergird him now and get him where we need him to be, him and Kirsten Gillibrand, so that we can liberate our franchise through the body that must do that for the American people. And so there are multi-faceted ways in which I think we can weigh in. I know we can weigh in because we've done it. We have to use our ingenuity. We have to sacrifice some time, some talent, some resources to make sure that we can mitigate the damages that are being done in state legislatures across this country.
Thank you so much. Deputy Director Aiden, let me let you jump in on that one.
I will just add a few things that I think, I know that the Deltas and many other organizations, nonpartisan organizations and others are doing that I think are part of the big picture that we've heard a lot about, which is lifting up the roles of secretaries of states, of members of our county and local level boards of education, the role of poll workers being inside or around polling places. Year round, people are in positions of authority that we don't often think have the power that they do, but I think we are learning more and more the role that they play. Obviously, we're seeing in places like Georgia and Florida and elsewhere, people respond to that power, and people working to ensure that more people participate by trying to restrict the power of those positions. But I think we should be thinking broadly about like where we represented in the entire, you know, we want a seat at the table. We've long wanted a seat at the table, and one of those seats should be as parts of the political process. I agree we should all year be thinking about voter registration and get out the vote, and lifting up how it's not just the big elections, but our local elections for our school boards, for our state judges, for our city council and county commissions, how all of those, again, are places of authority and decision-making bodies that impact our lives. And we need to be fully engaged in those as part of our year-round effort. Of course, on election day, we have to be mobilized as we historically and continue to be. And then I would be remiss if I didn't shout out that, you know, we are on the brink of redistricting for positions of power all throughout our country, from Congress to our state legislative bodies to, again, all of the local bodies that I listed. And we have to be a part of that process. I know the Deltas, I know many other faith-based organizations are setting up apparatuses so that we are part of the process, and we try to get fair maps that allow us to actually elect representatives who will then respond to the needs of our community. And I would just be remiss if I didn't mention that is, until we have better representation and policymakers, we are going to, in many ways, get the outcomes that we continue to have. And we have an opportunity right around the corner to be in the fight around redistricting and map making. And it is something we're not, I don't think, talking about enough, but I think it is one of the more consequential things that are ahead of us, just as much as any election, just as much as any bill being considered in the in federal or state government.
Thanks so much, Leah, for that response, and appreciate that shout out to us. The members of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated and the Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated, we push voter registration, education, mobilization year-round, every year. When it's a national election, off election, whatever it is, we're constantly doing that because that's important to us. I feel a little compelled, Beverly, as the chair of the Divine Nine, to also say that all of the Divine Nine participate in such. And we also collaborated recently on sending out correspondence across the country of our support for the People Act. But let me bring in Dr. Johnson. I saw you, the way you looked when I talked about can't give grandmama the peanut butter and jelly sandwich in the bottle of water. I know you want to get in here, but I also want to say we're also seeing efforts, and this is very interesting to me, Dr. Johnson, that take hold after an election to invalidate Black votes. It's almost like what Joseph Stalin said, what matters more than casting votes is the one who counts the votes. And the audits that occurred in Georgia and Arizona that are metastasizing across the country are a clear indication that the majority will stop at nothing to disempower Blacks. What can we do, not only in terms of what we see on election day, but what can we do, Dr. Johnson, post-election to ensure the votes we cast are not discarded or discounted?
Yeah, so on election day, in addition to the things that others have brought up, one thing you can do if you are in line and have the ability to stay in line, don't leave, no matter what they tell you. If someone tries to get you, tell you you can't vote or whatever, there's a number of resources you can dial into. But I want to say 866-HOUR-VOTE is a number you can call while you're standing in line trying to cast your vote if someone is trying to deny you that right. Organizations like mine, the Brennan Center for Justice, like the NAACP LDF, like the Lawyers Committee, often have people standing by ready to defend you, ready to advise you on how to ensure your vote is cast. It may be a provisional ballot, but there are resources on election day, even while you're standing in line to cast these ballots. Now, the bigger issue, or potentially a big issue, is just what you mentioned, Brother Grant, about how there are a number of states right now that are trying to pass laws that essentially say the state assembly, a state legislature, can undo the expressed will of the people and send in a election result that doesn't accord with what the people have decided based on the vote count. And this is not a small issue. This is a threat to the very basis of democracy. And we're on the cusp of seeing this pass in some states if the legal fights don't materialize the way we want them to. We saw this on January 6th, where members of both houses of Congress tried to unravel or overturn the outcome of the election, and with rhetoric so fiery that it led to the Capitol insurrection. Another thing that we've seen a lot of, and this is something the Brennan Center is paying close attention to, are the threats that are being made to secretaries of state and to poll workers, trying to intimidate them to not show up to work, to go back on their professionalism, essentially, and suggest that maybe I didn't count those things right, or be intimidated by threats to their family to excuse themselves from the process altogether. So even the safeguards we have in place, safeguards that S1 and H.R.1 would put in place, people are already actively working to put in place things that would prevent those who conduct elections from being too scared to participate because they care about their safety and that of their family. So again, the fight is on for protecting our voting rights. And the only thing I can say on the day of is to persevere and to learn all the obstacles that have been put in front of you, and lean on those grassroots organizations so that you can surmount them. And then after the election, insist that your vote is counted. Turn to those nonprofits and those legal advocacy groups that can take your case and fight for your right, both at the state level and so on. But until these things are passed, I live in Virginia, and we have a governor's race this year. And if S1, H.R.1 doesn't pass before the governor's race, we have to deal with the laws that have been put in place that make it more difficult for some folks to vote. And we can't allow that to discourage us or prevent us from participating. So there are resources out there, but a lot of it's going to require courage and perseverance on our individual parts in order to ensure our votes are counted. And there are lots of folks like everyone here on the call that are in the fight for this together.
Thanks so much, Brother Johnson, for that response. Let me remind our viewers that you can drop questions in the chat. So any of our viewers who are interested in posing questions to these great panelists, they're ready for them. They can take any question on the fly. That's what they do. So any question you want to ask this group of panelists, be sure and do that. I want to go to Congresswoman Clark, because many of us have never seen Congresswoman Clark post-election audits months after the election, truly to invalidate votes. Could you speak on that?
Yes, this is a relatively new phenomenon. This is something that has been spurred on by, I believe, Donald Trump and his sycophants who are using social media to create a fallacy around what took place on Election Day of 2020. And they have continued to create this specter of voter fraud that even their own administration said did not take place, but are creating a spectacle that they can then use to rile up, their supporters to, again, create really dangerous conditions under which we all then have to go out and execute our votes. They're trying to delegitimize an election that took place last year in the hope that they can create some justification for what they are currently doing. And again, the social media aspect of all of this, the conspiracy theories that have been floating out there, the whole QAnon phenomena is all built upon what we see being acted out right now in states like Arizona. And so, you know, we have to be vigilant in putting out the truth so that, you know, our people can discern and be guided by the integrity of our elections. The idea is to create this doubt that perhaps we don't have elections with integrity in the United States of America. And that fuels those who I believe espouse a white supremacist ideology in continuing this battle that began with Donald Trump and continues to this day with a number of his followers who are not only rank and file citizens, but are also members of Congress, which is why we are in the space where we are battling over S1, battling over just getting the truth out to the American people about what took place and why on January 6th. You may have heard already that he is encouraging people to believe that he will be reinstated as president during the month of August. This is very dangerous. And we are really doing a deep dive into that in Washington, D.C. I happen to also sit on the Homeland Security Committee, which is in high alert. The Department of Homeland Security is on high alert at this moment because of the falsehoods and the actions that are taking place in different pockets across this nation. And Arizona has taken things to a whole new level in terms of this recounting of the ballots. And I'm again very happy to see our Attorney General, Merrick Garland, standing up an operation within the Department of Justice to go after this type of behavior. Because if we allow it to just continue on this path, it will be very disruptive to our democracy. And our democracy is ultimately what's at stake here. I did want to say that, yes, redistricting, the maps are going to be really important, and state legislatures play a very big role in drawing the districts that we see ourselves represented in at the state, local, and federal level. And so H.R.1 S1 addresses redistricting and takes it out of the political sphere into a sphere where we have an unbiased environment in which to create the jurisdictions of representation in the United States of America. And it's important for us to push for this because it's right around the corner. New York State lost a seat by 89 votes. And so we know how very important it is for us to get an accurate count. We did all of this work in the census, and I want to thank DST. I want to thank the Omegas because you did tremendous work during a pandemic to get as accurate a count as possible. Now, these folks are intending to use this mechanism to maintain their power, which is what this is all about at the end of the day. It's a power struggle.
Boy, if anybody had tried to walk out of the room, they ran back in when you said there's a new lie that he'll be reinstated back in August. They ran back in then, Congresswoman Clark. We appreciate that. I got to get Representative Smyrie and Deputy Director Aiden on this post-election auditing. Would you speak to that, Representative Smyrie?
Well, you know, in Georgia, Grand Boss, we've been audited 3 times, and the votes have been counted 3 times. Just fruitless. I mean, it's just going up a dead end. And so with that in mind, we have to continue to be vigilant and continue to fight the fight. This notion of fraudulent elections is just nonsense. It's a narrative that that the last president has put in place, and it's a narrative that those that a small minority are following, and some fragment of the Republican Party is following it as well. So there is no fraudulent. It's been proven over and over again that that was a fair election in Georgia. The fact of the matter is that the Democrats won. Georgia changed the political landscape in America, sending 2 U.S. Senators to the Senate, gave the majority to the Democrats, and the victory for Biden helped him and Kamala Harris to become president and vice president, respectively. And this is by no accident. And I know we've said this many times, but I, there's old saying said, if you don't use your bullhorn, somebody will use it as a spit tube. So I just want to congratulate and thank President Smith and the ladies and the SARS of Delta Sigma Theta, and I'm gonna give some shout outs. Rhonda Briggins, who led their social action committee, and then to you, Grand Bosselors, for all of your work, and for Cedric Spencer, who helps us in our social action, and thank him and all the members of the Pan-Atlantic Council. This is just not happening. It takes synergy and it takes energy. It takes sweat equity to win an election. So with that in mind, I just wanted to say those things and let you all know those are the type of efforts that is required for us to win an election. We must continue to have mobilization. We must continue to have the flushing of the vote, the GOTV efforts by our faith communities and all of our social organizations and religious and faith communities. So Georgia just didn't happen. There were so many organizations, Georgia Voter Project, a Fair Fight, all these organizations in our state helped pull the umbrellas together, the NAACP and ACLU. Everybody chipped in, and that's why Georgia was victorious. I know we've got a lot of things that we're fighting, but we also have to salute those that make this happen. And I just wanted to give a shout out to those that made it possible for the United States Senate now to be in the hands of Democrats.
Well, thank you so much for that. And I appreciate you shouting out Cedric Spencer. And I heard you shout out Rhonda. You know, you got to shout out Siobhan because they're two peas in a pod. So I'm going to just throw that in for free.
Well, thank you.
Let me go to Deputy Director Ayton and just get her opinion on this after post-election, these antics of doing audits. But I also want you to chime in on something that I see as a couple of questions in the chat. And as everyone knows, yesterday Senate Republicans banded together and blocked the For the People Act, a sweeping voter rights bill. The White House has said it will continue to push for voting reform, including the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which many of us have talked about tonight. In light of Senator Joe Manchin's unwillingness to end the filibuster, the questions in the chat were about the filibuster, his unwillingness to end the filibuster. What is the realistic possibility of federal voter legislation passing the Senate before the midterm elections? Leah, I'll go to you on that.
I'm not the best audience for that, except I would say that we need to do everything possible to get this legislation passed. We have all the evidence in the world that we need the structural change that is part of the bills that have been contemplated and built up and carefully crafted and crafted consistent with our Constitution. And the time is now. And this is the moment to pass this legislation. And we simply cannot continue to expect Black voters to do what they have had to do in recent years without the protections that are shown necessary in our country. And I would definitely defer to other people who are much more savvy about the legislative process, about the likelihood. But I, as a person individually and as an advocate, a civil rights advocate, this has to be the moment, and this legislation needs and must be passed.
Let's go to Congresswoman Clark because we know she knows. So we'll get your input on what is the realistic possibility of voter legislation passing.
Hope springs eternal, my brother. Hope springs eternal. We're going to continue to press, to fight, to change hearts and minds over in the Senate. We've heard Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer say that they're going to continue to bring forth these pieces of legislation time and time again. And all we can do is follow the lead and make sure that we too make the same demands simultaneously. There has to be a fervor for S1 to be passed in the Senate. Manchin moved. People thought he wouldn't move. He has moved. And so we need to continue to keep the pressure on. Let me thank you, Grand Basileus, for being an outstanding moderator. And let me thank my sorors, President Soror Beverly Smith, Soror Siobhan Arline Bradley, and Soror Rhonda Briggins for really bringing this conversation to life this evening. And of course, to my fellow panelists, outstanding, know so much more than I do. I've learned a lot this evening, but let's stay the course, folks. We can make this happen if we believe we can make it happen. We're not powerless in this moment.
Thank you, Congresswoman Clark. And I'm going to take that as our lead to kind of begin to wrap up. Let me get this last question from those, because it sounds like we surely got good advice from Congresswoman Clark. What advice can you give the viewers or organizations? Do we need to assemble a green book providing state-by-state instructions to show our communities how to navigate these voter suppression laws as they come up in our past? How do we, at the end of the day, be proactive instead of reactive? We've heard from Congresswoman Clark. Let's go to Representative Smyrie as we close.
Well, Grand Basileus, I think that would be something to continue the network and the mobilization. To me, that would be in order to stay engaged, to be involved with the political process, and for the various organizations throughout America, if we could form some sort of linkage with the various organizations, I think it would be a great step in the right direction. I think that we have a lot of momentum, and we should not allow that to die down. We should continue to use that momentum, continue to use the Pan-Atlantic Council and other organizations throughout our various networks in our community, and keep this dialogue going. The one thing that we could, the worst thing we could do now is to drop our guards and not be vigilant in terms of what the opponent is about. So we have got to stay engaged and continue our mobilization and continue a year-round registration of voters and still involving the various community organizations in light of the fight that we're in. This is not over, and it has not ended. Just like the Congresswoman said, we just cannot give up. We got to continue the political pressure and the political tourniquet, and keep the pressure on and not give up and continue this fight, because we must pass H.R.1 to give validity and give some muscle and some influence behind these states that want to suppress our voters. So H.R.1 and H.R.4 must fight to continue to pass the legislation.
Thank you so much. Deputy Director Ayton.
I want to thank you all for this conversation. I would simply add that I agree this is our moment. I agree that we should be fervently pushing for H.R.1 and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which would respond to the Supreme Court removing one of the most effective safeguards that we have used for nearly 50 years to protect our voting rights. And while we are doing that, we are doing all of the things that we talked about preparing for elections year round. We are engaged in the redistricting process. We are thinking and talking about the role of political participation and how it opens up the door and unleashes the ability to change our opportunities in all areas of life. That should be talked about on Sundays in the barbershops, on the radio, as part of our public education. That this is just a key part of our lives, and we have to be, as we have done historically, as part of our time in this country, we have tried every way possible, as we will continue to do, to be full citizens. And I would just encourage us to continue to remember that, and remember that we owe it to far too many people to not think that we have to put in the work until this country treats us as full citizens, as we are entitled.
Thank you so much. Dr. Johnson, close us out.
Yes, sir. And I again, thank you for allowing me to be part of this. It's a great conversation. And the only thing I'll add is to remember, for all of us to remember, especially those listening, that there are 50 different sets of rules to vote. And in some cases, even more than 50, because every state does things a little bit differently. So you have to learn how your state does it in order to to get a sense of how the laws, the barriers, the obstacles that are being put in front of you, and what you need to do to overcome those things. The thing that works for your cousin in Cleveland may not work for you. So you have to lean on local organizations, or organizations with local knowledge, nonprofits, grassroots, fraternities, sororities, faith organizations, community service organizations, in order to know how your town, your city votes, what obstacles are going to be presented to you, and then how you can best overcome those things. As Leah said, this fight is for us to preserve the country that so many others have died and bled to create for us. The nation we have today didn't just happen. It wasn't inevitable. It was produced by a lot of Black work to bring us to this point. And now it's incumbent upon us to pick up the baton and carry it to the next benchmark, so that the nation we leave behind for the next generation is better than the one we inherited.
Thank you so much. Boy. Just like Black folks showed up and showed out in November and January, our panelists, Congresswoman Clark, Representative Smyrie, Deputy Director Aiden, and Dr. Johnson, showed up and showed out tonight. We want to thank them for their outstanding job in providing a very thought-provoking call to action regarding voting rights and voting suppression tactics. To our viewers, it's time to roll up our sleeves and help get voting rights legislation across the finish line. Help state legislatures fight the 389 bills in 48 states that restrict access to vote, and prepare for the 2022 midterm elections. Never forget, too many sacrifices were made for us to relinquish our rights of citizenship. Every generation is called upon to till the soil of our democracy. We cannot let it be said that when it was our time, we did not pick up the plow. On behalf of the ladies of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated and the men of the Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated, I thank you for joining us. Good night, and God bless you.